Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Dr. Suzannah Bozzone, who is a medical doctor, diplomated in the Board of Lifestyle Medicine, a member of the Love.Life Medical Consultation Telehealth Service, which we're going to talk quite a bit about. So welcome, Dr. Bozzone. How are you? Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you so much. I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm good. When we start off, we want people to get to know a little bit about, your journey. Where and when did you get turned on to plant-based living? The whole idea of eating that way. Was it early in your life? Was it later in your medical education? Talk a little bit about the evolution of that, if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So always in my life, I've really been what I thought was holistic and really kind of geared that way. But nutritionally, I really didn't know anything, and I certainly didn't learn anything in medical school, and so I still didn't know anything. But I was very into yoga in my residency, and so because of that. There's a lot of kind of vegetarians in the yoga world. I wasn't one of them, but as I kind of was practicing and I did my yoga teacher training after residency, I took time to do a yoga teacher training and kind of incorporated that into my practice. So as a result, patients would come in and think I was plant-based or vegetarian because they knew I was a yoga teacher. And I would say things like, no, we've got these teeth. So we can eat meat. And I'd say all the things that someone that doesn't know says until I remember I was working in Sonoma, California, after I had finished residency, which I did in Denver, and then was working in Sonoma and was eating what I thought was healthy. We were always plant strong. We always had vegetables, but there was a large bit of meat because I was an athlete, because I always thought you had to eat all this meat. And I remember seeing a patient who went keto. And I had never seen cholesterol. I was like, oh my God, like his cholesterol jumped just so high. And I said, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, I went, this low carb thing. And he told me about it. And I thought, and so that was kind of one little light bulb.
Right.
And then I was working in the realm of with my patient population, but I was also working as the medical director of wellness. And so in that, I was working with communities and employee health programs and trying to be the bridge between the sick care system and the community. And so in that, I kind of started learning more about how the community dictates how we live, and how we live dictates our health. And some little angel that to this day, I don't remember his name, but was the one that suggested, he was like an advisor to the CEO of the hospital. And he said, you should go to the Lifestyle Medicine Conference. And it was in San Diego that year. And I went, and then it was just like, oh my gosh, and then where you see, I saw Esselstyn, and I saw Ornish, and I saw Barnard. Everybody was there, and everybody was presenting this data that I thought of all the people, me kind of in this world, a kind of quasi holistic doctor, and I had no idea. And that was really where, for me, I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person.
Right.
So it was just when I saw.
So at that point, you stopped pointing at those little canines, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That was the first thing I did. I stopped pointing at those.
So you had already been practicing a number of years as a physician, obviously, by the time you got turned on to all of that.
Yes.
And then once you did, you saw the path toward lifestyle medicine as a vehicle that would be more to your liking, more to what was going to be more consistent with your mindset at that point. And so at that point, you were in California. So then you made a move to Tennessee, obviously, because you went from there back to Tennessee.
Yes.
So what was the drive to bring you back to Tennessee through your professional path?
Well, I'll tell you, frankly, Frank.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will tell you I was living in Sonoma, California, and in my 6 years there, I had 3 children, and my mom was in Chattanooga, as was my sister, and my family nearby. And so, and if you've ever been to Sonoma, you know it's a wonderful place to be. But if you live there and you have more and more kids, then you have to live in smaller and smaller houses because you can't afford anything.
Right. Right.
So we moved back to Tennessee mostly for family, but also the cost of living. And we moved actually right before all the fires and all that, if you remember. So we were there for about 6 years, and it was wonderful and lovely, but it was a really lovely transition as well. And especially in the medical practice, because I was, I guess I had been practicing in Tennessee for a year when they offered the first lifestyle medicine, the board certification. I took that first year. And
that was that 2017 board, is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was great to do that. And also it's really lovely to when you start a new practice or a new place, anytime you move, to really take and start it the way you want to practice it, as opposed to trying to adapt and those things. And so that was actually really nice timing, because I was already plant-based moving to Tennessee, and it was very foreign here for sure.
Right. Well, Suzannah, talk about that transition, because you went from not really being connected to plants, and now you're moving into plant-based. So how was that transition for you? Because we have a lot of people watching who make that transition.
Yeah.
And there's always that discussion of, how do we stay compliant with that? What do we do? What are the pitfalls, the blocks? So what was that for you? How did you deal with that little, shift into that way of living that you now are going to share with your patients, but you needed to obviously apply it to you first.
Right, exactly. And so for me, the most wonderful thing, what that was easy for me, was giving up meat, because I ate meat because I thought I was supposed to have all this protein to support my, my swimming and all of these things. But it always made me feel bad. I felt like I had a lead in my stomach. So that was almost a relief to say, I don't need that for protein. And so for that piece was easy. Now, dairy, that was not easy at all, because I was a complete cheeseaholic. We were in Sonoma drinking red wine and like half a wheel of brie every night. It was just, and so that was really hard. And that was also very hard, because when you think back of it, I thought I was eating healthy. I was eating salads and a lot of veg. But every salad had a big glop of cottage cheese, and there was just dairy everywhere, yogurt for breakfast, cheese everywhere. And so that was a big transition, and it was certainly a big transition for my kids.
Right.
So at the time when we moved, not for my youngest, when my youngest had his first birthday in Tennessee, and so he never had dairy.
Right.
So for him, it was the easiest thing. But for my daughter, my second, and she was 3 to 4, and she was picky anyway. And dairy was one of the few things that she would eat. So that was real. And at that time, there weren't all that many kind of, yogurt alternatives. They were really expensive and not very good. And so that was probably the most difficult thing. But, after a while, it's not in your house. You think of other things. and so we made it work. And my older son, interestingly, wasn't as difficult to transition as my daughter, because he could be bribed with anything, but she wouldn't.
Well, you know what, with cheese, and this, and I know this, we kind of grew up in Italian households. It was like, that was the major food group. But more than that, because of those casomorphines, you get that little opiate addictive quality to dairy. And when you come off, you kind of feel that. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So it was a big step for your children to make that step. And I know that. Because I know how it was even in my own life. It was easy to get rid of sugar and other things, but dairy held on a little bit because of my old patterns, old connections, all of that. So I'm here with Dr. Suzannah Bozzone. We're going to take just a very short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Dr. Frank Sabatino here. Are you ready for an extraordinary adventure that combines relaxation, exploration, and vibrant health? Then set your sails for the NHA plant-exclusive cruises. Imagine cruising through exotic destinations, savoring delectable plant-based cuisine, and engaging in rejuvenating activities, all while surrounded by like-minded individuals passionate about health and wellness. These cruises offer more than just a vacation. They offer an opportunity to immerse yourself in the NHA's principles of healthy living. And they rank incredibly high on the ratings of eco-friendly cruise lines. We all know how important our oceans are, and our cruise partner, Windstar, is fully committed to this. Join us aboard our upcoming plant-exclusive cruises and experience the synergy of health and leisure. Delight in gourmet, SOS-free meals prepared by talented chefs. Attend informative workshops and enjoy the serenity of the sea, all tailored to nourish your body, mind, and spirit. For more details and to reserve your spot on our next adventure, visit healthscience.org and click the link under travel. Don't miss this chance to indulge in a wellness retreat like no other. Elevate your well-being and make memories that will last a lifetime. And remember, your feedback matters. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm here with Dr. Suzannah Bozzone, who's from Love.Life Telehealth. I noticed one of the things that was part of your history was a strong connection, I guess, from your community work with the Latino community, both here and abroad. Talk a little bit about how that evolved in your life and why that was a passion and a purpose for you in the work that you've done. And when you talk about abroad, tell me a little bit more about what that meant. Where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. And I love talking about that because I think it's so important that we recognize that if we don't meet people where they are, and we have to understand where they're coming from, and it's very hard to do if you've never lived their life or you've never seen where they came from, and that's not always going to be feasible. But it was really emphasized in my training because I did my medical school in Memphis, but I didn't. This is kind of unusual. I wasn't sure what I wanted to apply to, so I took off a year because I knew I had pretty strong Spanish, but I really wanted to get fluent in Spanish. And so I took off a year to work in a residency preparation position, which is unusual, but it was in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was called Médicos para la Familia. And it was completely in Spanish. And it was just an amazing opportunity to basically be in a Latino community, but in the States. And I was doing research also at Vanderbilt while I was working in that position. And while there, I kind of went as a support to my boss, who was teaching advanced life support and obstetrics down in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Wow. And I went and literally I was like moving plastic vaginas around and putting babies in them for the, for like breech and it was just, so I was just like an assistant to carry stuff around. And then I would do things that was required as he was teaching the also course to the residents there.
I got it.
But it was so seeing that from a training perspective. And then I ended up going to Denver for my residency. And I was in the Denver Health Clinic where my residency was. And it was adjacent in the same building to the refugee clinic. So most of my patients there were non-English speaking. And in fact, I thought I would use my Spanish, but I didn't use my Spanish there very much because most of them, my first year, were Eritrean, Ethiopian. There was a huge Russian population. We had a lot of Iraqis. We had just a really fascinating and intermingled. Then we got a huge group that came in into Denver from Myanmar. And so really understanding that, what are they experiencing?
Right.
So many coming in from Africa, first time to see snow, tying their babies to their back and really kind of, and then asking them like, so what's going on with your ear? You're here for your ear. What is this stuff you put in it? And I remember one patient was like, I put chicken fat in it. And I was like, well, why? But you don't come from a place of we know everything. There's so much we don't know. And when you kind of get an understanding of what has been their medicine or their idea of healing,
right? And
that if I'm going to just say, here's a prescription, and I don't explain to them what's a pharmacy and how do they get the bus, and then I'm not doing anything. And so that was a real eye opener in that, you're, even if you were extremely, following the guidelines exactly how they should be, if you don't know what they understand and,
Right.
and what they perceive of you, should they trust you? Why would they trust you? You don't know anything about them or what they've been through. And it was just like a fascinating thing. And so when I moved to Sonoma, after that, I got offered 2 jobs, and one was kind of in a private clinic that was very standard, where all your Sonomans went, and then the other was a community health center, which was predominantly Spanish speaking. And I said, well, can I do both? So they arranged a joint population or a joint contract where I could do 2 days in one and 2 days in the other, because I really wanted to engage with the whole population. And so that was just, and then I added on that piece of the medical director of wellness, so that I'm working from the connection from community to hospital side, and recognizing that we are a community and that your built environment plays such a big role in the health that you have, no matter how much money you have. And so in my private clinic, and I was seeing all the somms and all the, vineyard owners and all these wine aficionados that had everything at their fingertips. And then you recognize, and I'm seeing all the people that are spraying the grapes and harvesting the fields, doing all of the work to make the grapes grow. But we are Sonoma, and this was, when we would all get sick and allergies, when certain things would happen, right? When the fires would happen, and how much asthma attacks when they spray the grapes, everybody was having issues. There was things that were community wide, and to recognize that you have to look from the built environment standpoint. And so
How did that diversity of world peoples end up in Denver? How did that transpire?
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. Well, so, I don't understand the politics of that, but they, I guess, and don't quote me on this, I really am not the person to act. I was working this, and I would ask, like, oh, so you're from Myanmar, and we only had, a lot of them spoke this language called Karen that was, as I understood it, not a written language. There was only one translator. It wasn't on our service. We had to get him into the clinic as opposed to using the phones. It was just fascinating. But they all came because there was some kind of contract with somebody that was a political official in Denver, and said, okay, we'll bring him to Denver. And so it's just certain, and I don't know how that works, but it shifted. I was there for 3 years in residency, and I had a huge, mostly Ethiopian and Eritrean population, which is still there, largely. I'm sure they're all still there now. But as my years went on, the new patients that would come in would depend on what was happening in the world and which of those refugees would be sent to Denver. And so there was a lot from the Middle East. There was, it was really diverse and amazing education. And while I was there, I also just in abroad with that question, I went and spent a month in Mexico, which was wonderful because I had so many Spanish speaking patients from Mexico before that, and then also after that. And I had that idea of how their clinics work. That their primary care is very different than ours, their specialist care. And so I got to round in the hospitals and see the satellite clinics and see what they were using. And it's just, there's nothing like that to really understand. I spent about a month in Dominican Republic as well, to really recognize how compassionate we need to be, and both when we're working there, but also when we are here, and what these people experience, and when they really need healing, and what we can give them, that sometimes we're just not aware of all the barriers that they face. And I think that that was been really influential in my life.
Where you are now, are you still connected to the Latino community? Is that still something that's a major piece for you?
So not as much as I'd like, unfortunately. I do a lot of work with the YMCA. I'm a Y girl, and I'm on the board of the YMCA. But I also used to work at the YMCA before medical school, and so we've done some projects here that are very cool and engaged with the underserved, but not so much with the Latino population right now. So I'm actually currently working with a student. We have a project we do that's called the Heart and Soul Project, that's based off of the seriesproject.org, the CERES, which is an amazing thing that teaches teens to grow food, to cook food, and the meals go to patients in need. And so in our program, we did a whole food plant-based version of that. The original one was very plant strong, but not completely whole food plant based, which is ours. And we're doing it El Soul Food. So it's Latino and African American flavors.
Very cool. Yeah, that's cool.
And it's going to heart failure patients that have been discharged. But in that, I met a volunteer who's a Master's of Public Health student, and he's also Cuban. And so we are hoping that together, juntos podemos hacer esto en español, and do the same courses for that community. So that's something I'm working on right now. So I hope that it takes off.
That's awesome. When you went to Sonoma, it's kind of interesting. You're very young. You did, that sounded like a position of some gravitas, being the medical director of wellness at the hospital. I mean, that's pretty amazing. How did that transpire? Because someone recognized some of your ability and insight and you were relatively young in practice, right?
Yeah, but it's an interesting community that, it's a very small community. And I think, that there was various we need help. Who's the right person to do it? And I think also some of the older docs, they didn't want anything else on their plate. And they're, so I think the younger docs coming in, they were like, ooh, you have energy. You do this.
Right. Okay. I see. Okay. So it was a nice distribution of labor. They recognized that you could do it. Absolutely. I can see how enthusiastic you are. They figured this is the person. Let's get her on board.
It might have been a bit of that.
Working with that community that you did, the Latino community, you and I both know that they have unique increased risks for a number of factors, including diabetes, obesity, things of this nature, high blood pressure. So it's a community that really needs the kind of intervention we're talking about. When you worked, it must have been difficult to get certain compliance for the kinds of choices are necessary to make those changes in a population that probably was somewhat resistant to that. Talk about how you dealt with that issue of compliance, resistance, and were able to make whatever dent you could in some of those risk factors. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So you're particularly talking about using plant-based nutrition with Latino.
Yeah. The way that you were approaching, let's say, your lifestyle approach, all the pillars, whatever they were, exercise, food, and all of it. But yet this is a community that was not really connected to those factors. So how did you make that? How did you bridge that? How did you make a dent into that mindset to help that?
Yeah. And I think what's really important is, number one, to recognize that when I was working in that population as deeply as I wasn't fully that I was still in Sonoma then. So I was only just beginning that transition into that. So I think I might approach it differently now. And I'll tell you that it is really fun to think of, well, what do we know to be true and what can we connect around? And, we can connect generally around beans. They're talking about, and what's really cool is that what I found in that population, because while I wasn't fully on my plant-based journey, I was very holistic in terms of movement and approaching things in a holistic way. And I mean, that population is just they bring you in as a family. You are part of the group. And so when you talk about, what is lifestyle medicine and having a connection to your family and to your community is such a major piece. And we recognize that, in America, we have nearly 60% of Americans that are endorsing loneliness. Right. But I would venture to guess that many of them are not Latino. Right. It's so there's a piece of that where you have this really strong tie often to, and not to be grossly generalizing, but a strong tie to religion, to connection to community, and also to the recognition of what's happened upon moving to this country. How did you used to eat, and what's happened, because what I found often was that they would really resonate with so what are you eating versus when you go home? What do you eat then? And then they always say, oh, I'm walking all the time. I lost 10 pounds when I went home to visit, and they're eating more whole foods.
Well, they're basically eating arroz con frijoles, that. And that works, baby. That'll get you down, that'll get you down in the right place, So.
Right. And that's what, just tie in with what they recognize, what they know to be true. And then they also can visualize, I feel better when I'm home because I'm eating the food, I'm walking around.
It's such a sad commentary how those indigenous diets that are so beneficial get so lost in the undertow when they move to countries like ours, where now you're inundated, which is processed food around the clock. Yeah. And they lose connection with the very power and autonomy they had in their own indigenous culture. It's kind of a sad commentary to watch that sometimes.
It is, but it is, they really have often a twinkle when they start thinking about that, because it's
Right.
part of their roots. And when and I'd say in Sonoma, and what I see a lot of teenagers when I was there, and they're all eating hot Cheetos, and you could clearly say, with the hot Cheetos, like, is this something you grew up on? Clearly not, and so just relating that, and also celebrating their roots as opposed to trying to ignore or move on. It's really saying, no, this is really a beautiful thing, and we want to go back to that. And I think that that's a really nice way to approach it, because what we want to do is not change your culture. And that's what we do with this El Soul food, that it's really about finding
Right.
flavors that you understand, that you're familiar with. And I've run into problems before where, bringing food that was so foreign to somebody. I had a patient who was just really struggling. She had young kids. She was going blind because of diabetes. She couldn't afford even her medications that were reduced down to $1. So I went, and a friend of mine said, we just had a plant-based potluck. We have all this leftover food. Is there anybody could use it? And I was like, oh yeah. So I brought it to her, and in my mind, I was like, this is great. Right? This is going to be so helpful. She's lacking money. I'm going to bring her this food. She's going to be great. It's going to feed her for the whole week, and her kids. And then I saw her in clinic, and I was like, did you eat the food? And she said, no, I didn't know what that was. And she's like, there was some of the stuff I recognized. I ate that, but I was like, and it was,
It was so alien and foreign. I get it. Yeah.
So I was like, at first I was kind of angry, and then I was like, well, that's just me being like,
Yeah, that's just meeting people where they are. You made that point. Is such an important point too, because early on, even in my own career, many times, you get so fired up, you're almost like on preacher level of wanting to turn people on to this stuff because it's going to help them. But at the same token, because you're not really appreciating where they are, you can actually turn them off to a path that may absolutely be beneficial in their lives by trying to force them almost to be where you want them to be rather than where they are or where they're capable of being in that moment, So that's a big piece. Let me shift gears a little bit, because I know, you've made a big step in what you've done to shift away from being the classic disease manager that most doctors, unfortunately, are trained to be, to move into this whole place of empowerment and realizing the power of lifestyle choice for helping people embrace their autonomy and their independence and their freedom from pharmaceutical industries and so on that really only lock them into disease patterns. So talk about, if you can give a little synopsis of what your philosophy really is and how connecting to Love.Life Telehealth allows you to manifest that in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So more than anything, what I think is most valuable to relate to patients and to anyone is that we are here for a purpose, and that purpose-driven living. And that's really where I start. So with anyone that comes in the door, or the virtual door, or with any patient that comes to you, they often have come from this background of, I have been identified as my diagnosis, and my endpoint is a number, as opposed to my endpoint is living for purpose, to be the person I'm striving to become, to engage in what matters most to me. And then I kind of demote the health piece or the diagnosis piece to, well, yeah, you need your health to do that. But what is that for you? And let's identify that, because that's how we judge your reward. And any behaviors that we do are either going to get you closer to that endpoint or further away. And so if you can judge your reward based on, is this getting me closer to my best, most vital, vibrant self to do what matters most to me, or is it not? And if it's not, then we can start saying, maybe that ice cream, or maybe that habit that I thought was a reward, because always in my brain, sugar has been a reward for me. Maybe it's actually not a reward. And I can see that not with criticism, as in like I'm weak and I have a sweet tooth, but rather with power and curiosity to reframe that I have intentional choices to make every day. And our best scientific evidence shows us that our health is driven by our lifestyle. And what we do today in the office is going to be based on what you're ready to do and where you find your power. And if your power comes from I'm not going to address the thing that you still feel gives you power and try to take that away from you. We're going to work on that together and recognize that as we get into this journey and approach it with more mindfulness and intention and awareness of what is a true reward, then vitality and healthy choices become contagious and it grows. So with that kind of in mind, that's kind of how I approach it, is to really understand, hopefully, what they judge as their endpoint or their purpose, and how we can get them one step closer to that, and kind of be partners in that journey. And
Yeah,
so
I want to touch on that for a second, but before we do that, before we go any further, I want people to get an idea of where they can find you if they want to hook up with you, if they want to pursue having interaction with you. What's a website or a URL where they can go to find you?
yes. So it's Love.Life /telehealth, Suzannah Bozzone MD, which I thankfully only know because you just rolled it up there. But if you look for my name, Suzannah Bozzone, under Love.Life Telehealth, you'll find it. And I see patients in 7 states there. But if I'm not in your state, then I cannot tell you how amazing this team of physicians is. I know that so many of them already, but it's such.
Yeah, I've gotten to meet, I know Anthony Mazziello for a long time. He's a very good friend. And so when we started interviewing more of these docs, I'm just really quite amazed and quite pleased at the diversity of these incredible professionals and their mindsets and the way they're viewing things and the way they're helping people. It's really a remarkable group. So I've been very happy and pleased to be able to be part of sharing these people on this podcast. So it's really beautiful. I just want you to know that. So that's all good. Let me go back to what you were talking about, because you were making the point that you've got to go through this kind of re-education for the people that are coming to you, to let them have a sense of the capability that they have for healing and to be well. Do you have to do a lot of that with the people that come to telehealth, or do the people come to you already have done some investigation, which is why they're coming? So is it a little bit of speaking to the choir, or are they people that you still have to go from the get-go, from the starting gate, to do all of this kind of reorientation?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of the people that come to telehealth, not everybody, so I get kind of a mix, but relatively speaking, as opposed to my practice where I see patients kind of here locally, or my historical what I've done before, the telehealth patients are often like, they've already done all the seminars, they've already watched all the YouTubes, and we're talking about kind of refining. And with those patients, it's interesting, because the way that I work with those patients is, again, why are you here? What matters most to you? And then often it's kind of redefining their identity, to be someone that's searching for purpose, as opposed to sometimes it gets replaced with a salt, oil, sugar-free, plant-based eater. And sometimes or a marathon runner, or whatever that might be. And sometimes, while those things are amazing and often very healing, and there's a reason why that's kind of replaced their former identity as a diabetic, or an anxious person, or whatever it might be, that's been a huge helper on the path. But if it's replaced their identity with a process, then sometimes we have to refine joy in the journey. And that's something that I find, as people are kind of in this, and then they sometimes they get it and they're really deep into it, and they say, I don't understand. How come I haven't reversed my diabetes, or I did everything what I thought I was supposed to do, and they've kind of lost joy as part of it, and so sometimes we have to work with that piece as the identity with that group that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum.
I got you. Yeah. Yeah, I know that one of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, and one that you're aware of and that you utilize, is this whole idea of the stress component, which is a big piece. Now, I know going back to your residency, you were trained as a yoga instructor. So is that something you still bring to the table in the care and the work with people? And do you share that online with them, or do you urge them to be involved in yoga classes, or do you demo any of that? Do you present any of that in your own work with your clients? Talk a little bit about your yoga journey and its relationship to how you work and practice and live.
Yeah. So currently I use that. I do a lot of employee health and wellness. And again, this is kind of looking at how to create a community that nudges you into healthy behaviors, and how to make us unite around healthy behaviors, and I think the workplace is a beautiful place to do that. And so what I do there is I do education for employee workplaces that's lifestyle medicine based, but often I will teach yoga classes because they want office yoga. So I'll teach chair yoga and I always start out any of my webinars with grounding, exercising, some breath work, or sometimes some stretching. It kind of depends on the crew and the time that's allotted. So right now, any yoga that I'm teaching is usually in the employee wellness space.
And that's also an online space. So that's not live. That's not going to a business, or is it too?
Sometimes.
Okay.
So usually it's online. The vast majority of employee wellness I do is via virtual webinars, but I will sometimes companies will fly me in. I haven't been flown in to teach yoga, but usually that's more talking about resilience or mental health or other kind of pieces or facets of lifestyle medicine. But the vast majority, is because I started doing a lot of that during COVID and everything was virtual. And a lot of people have continued that because it's just such an easy, as you know, navigatable resource. But yeah, so with yoga here in town, sometimes I'll teach to yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainers, and because I think that that's so important. A lot of people that really want to embark and take a next step with their health will ask their yoga teacher for advice.
Right.
And so I think it's really valuable to teach yoga teachers to know what the evidence says in terms of lifestyle medicine.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've done some workshops at our local yoga studio here in Chattanooga. And I've also taught lifestyle medicine to the incoming teacher training crew to kind of help increase the knowledge base, because again, there's so many great trainers and people in the fitness space that are unfortunately giving really not the best nutritional advice, and nor should they be giving nutritional advice. But so I think it's important that we are part of a team and a partnership, because those people are doing such wonderful work in the healing space and getting people into their body to feel their body in a new way and the potential they have for healing. And so I think it enables them to be aware of how to spread that even more. But yeah, so how I got into it, I was a swimmer in college, and my coach was a Pan Pacs. He went to Pan Pacs and was a coach in Australia, and came back after a year where people were dropping times that were, quote, old, like swimming still in their 30s, and they were getting faster. And he was like, what, it turns out that they were doing yoga and they were adding that into their cross. Yeah. So in college, he brought yoga to I went to college at Davidson College in North Carolina, and go Cats. And he brought that to us there, and I just loved it. And also
it became your passion too.
It became my passion. And then I did it all through it was my sanity in residency. And then I would see all these rotator cuff injuries and all these other things in sports medicine, and recognize how important the strength, the core strength, and that we could do in yoga was to all my patients. And so that's really was a great thing to do. Right when I completed residency, I did a prolonged yoga teacher training. But it was amazing because you really would see how people carry themselves.
Right.
Your shoulders are forward and you're shielding yourself, and how, and I'm sure with your background, you see how people carry their strains and their.
And plus me, for 30 years, I've taught Tai Chi and Qigong too. So that's all been part of my personal practice. So yes, all of that structural alignment and so on is so important.
Yeah. And we're not trained to see it. And and then that's what I always like, it's right in front of your face. And I never even knew until you see
as people get older and they even get that forward head position, you can lose as much as 30% lung capacity just from forward head position. So there's strange things that can happen when you're not working with lengthening and opening. And so important what you're doing. Let me ask you another question, because just for my own information, is the telehealth service, the Love.Life, is it a collaborative space, meaning that if someone needed, let's say you assess that they need more than what you can offer in the sense of behavioral therapy or whatever, do you bring people in? Do you refer across or within the Love.Life service? Does that happen in that space?
Well, one thing that we do, and we talk a lot. So we have a wonderful meeting. We have meetings kind of every 2 weeks, and one of them is a clinical meeting. And so it's a great thing because we have so many amazing heads and so much diversity, as you mentioned,
Right.
backgrounds, and so it's just such a fantastic resource that if we have a tricky patient, we can bring it up to the team and say, what would you do? And then there's also kind of the ability to share and present cases and get information from.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know you guys did that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. And we don't tell the specifics of the patient per se to give, but we just kind of give the information and ask questions, say, oh, well, have you tried this? Or what did they say about that? Or how, and it's just fantastic because, as you might know, sometimes, and particularly before I was with Love.Life Telehealth, I was the first one in the state of Tennessee to get certified in lifestyle medicine. And so it was, you're kind of lonely, because you're like, well,
yeah.
And as particularly when you're early in it, you feel like you're kind of a solo ship. And then, to recognize that there's so many people that still have adaptations in the way they practice, but have seeing it from different eyes. It's such a valuable thing. And that's one of the many things I love about Love.Life.
Yeah, it's like a built-in think tank. It's really fantastic. It's fabulous. So, I'm going to ask you something. This is very important because I noticed one of the things you like to do is sing as often as you can. So are you making time for singing? Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
did you ever sing professionally? Did you ever do that with groups or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. I sang a number of weddings. I sang with the Chattanooga Symphony and Opera Chorus. I sang,
cool.
I sing with the Chattanooga Bach Choir right now, and we're working on St. John's Passion, which is amazing.
Wow, that's amazing.
German, yes. Yeah, and so I've sung with them for 6 or 7 years. When I was in Sonoma, funnily, actually, the 2 docs I worked with in those different clinics, one was a pediatrician and the other was in the private practice, the internal medicine doc, and they both sang together at Duke and started this. And so we sang basically sacred music, sometimes 15th century, sometimes. So we had a singing group called the Valley of the Moon Chamber Ensemble. So I sang all through my time in Sonoma, and then in Chattanooga, I was a paid soprano for a church when I was in medical school in Memphis, and so it's something that has, while there's times when you do more and times when you do less, it's been a really wonderful piece of, and really to recognize, again, why are we here?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I know so many docs and scientists that are musicians.
Yeah.
It's really an outlet, because I am too. I've played blues. I played in blues bands for years. And the people like Neil Barnard has a remarkable band, Carbon Works, which is a fantastic kind of fusion of classical and rock. It's interesting. So it's an incredible outlet. And I think it's important for people to see that, as physicians in the work you're doing, that it is about embracing all the opportunity that life has, all the mystery and magic that's out there. And it's not only about the rigid application of lifestyle principles. It's about, like you said, finding purpose and passion and being able to just live and enjoy life. That's so much a part of health and healing. And sometimes it gets lost in the undertow because we get so rigidly connected to what we think we need to do to be right and so on. And sometimes you just need to go with the flow a little bit and just really enjoy these other aspects of life, so that's fantastic. So what's on the horizon for you? Are there any things you want to do, accomplish in the works for you, or, where are you in your own life with any of that? Anything on the horizon that you're looking to do and accomplish?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a doctor on site with Nelson Campbell and his retreat.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's great.
And that'll be in March at Lake Junaluska in North Carolina, which I think will be beautiful and amazing and so exciting, because I have some patients from Love.Life that I've only ever seen online that are going to be there in person.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think they have bodies.
Yes, not just these heads that are talking.
Right, I know, it's amazing. It is so funny when you see people for the first time with their bodies on. And you think, gosh, I didn't expect you to be so
And not
tall.
only that, the patients, the people, when they see the doctor with the full body, they also are like taken aback. It's like, oh my God, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, it's so true. So I'm excited about that. And what I really love, in addition to, I love working with individual patients, but I really love, and I love the growth of this employee wellness, because again, creating communities. I'm trying to do that, and I'm on the executive committee and the steering committee for the Blue Zones Greater Chattanooga, to try to make Chattanooga into a Blue Zones as we work with the Blue Zones national team. But really, I have this beautiful opportunity and window into the companies and into HR departments, and to recognize that if we give the education, and we can do a challenge, right? So we're doing like what we just did, a 30-day disconnect, or to reconnect. And so it was trying to get space from social media. And so that's one thing I did with a company, and really talked about focus and connection, and how we can combat the loneliness epidemic by truly connecting in person, rather than on social media, and see what we can do in our lives to do that. And then we're moving into another challenge with that same company, that's going to be a 1 meal a day. Can we eat 1 plant-based meal a day or more, but just in what is the impact that has. And so that'll be kind of take us through the next challenge. So it's really fun to do that, because I get to see, I don't know anything, I was like in the whole medical world, you don't learn anything about business. And I certainly don't know how that works, but it's been fun to come in as this kind of partner with businesses, and see how they run, and also see how much power we can get to instigate walking meetings, and walk with a doc. And then when they start moving, and the feedback that they get, and how much more engaged with their work they are. And so that's been something I just really enjoy. So I'm excited to take that and continue to grow that.
That's fantastic. So, Suzanne, as we wind this down, do you have any final words you'd like to share with the audience out here?
Well, I think a lot of what we talked about is really just connecting to what matters most to you, and redefining that, because it's not going to be the same as it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And then finding joy in the journey. And if you feel isolated, then connect, so that that food should be something that connects you. And there's so many of us out there, so find us. And so, to really address that sense of isolation that can sometimes happen when we're searching to on this healthy journey, to find joy, to know that it is full of meaning if you look for it.
Well, I can't thank you enough, really, today. I want to really thank my guest, Dr. Suzannah Bozzone, for sharing her heart, her expertise, her enthusiasm. It's really infectious, and it's beautiful. And I urge the audience out there, if you want to connect with Suzannah, I urge you to follow her. You can see her location in the show notes that are going across the screen. And I really want to thank the audience that joined us today, because without you, we can't do what we do. And I want to really thank you for being part of this really active, healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. And I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today, and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.